We have a special guest with us today. He is served 2 tours in Iraq as a U.S. Marine and now works as a reporter, commentator, and director of communications for Hardlens Media. Please welcome to the show. It's Kit Cabello. Hey, Kit, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing good, Jimmy. It's a real pleasure to be on your show. I just want to say for the record that at this point right now, this is where we need to have independent media and independent commentators, because we are witnessing, again, firsthand, the beginning of something new happen. And as a result, finally people are starting to see the lie that is neoliberalism. It took me a while to even see it. I think we all were kind of taken aback with 2016, and with the fall of Bernie Sanders now and his endorsement of Joe Biden. It's something I've said on the show and maybe to some of my closer friends, that we got to move on away from Bernie and now continue actually really building a true progressive movement, which is why I started Hardlens Media up with Daniel Lupker, my co-host.
So let's talk. We'll get to the Bernie Sanders stuff in a sec, but let's cover some stuff because you're in Chicago, my hometown, and so this is going to get an update what's happening in Illinois, because they were told to go vote on March 17th in the middle of a pandemic, which is sociopathic. Ohio stopped their voting. Now, the Joe Biden campaign was giving out false information, saying it was safe to go vote. Tom Perez was telling everyone to vote. Bernie Sanders' campaign manager told everyone to vote and make sure they wash their hands. So all 3 campaigns were telling people to go vote. It was very sociopathic. And so now we have coronavirus in Illinois update, 74 more COVID-19 deaths and 1,222 new known cases reported. But Pritzker, who is the governor, says we are in fact bending the curve. So let's just talk to you real quick about what are people saying in Illinois about Pritzker allowing that vote to go forward, and what is the fallout from that? Anything?
Well, actually, there is some fallout, and this just recently happened. Right now, and I'm very sad to report this because we talked about this in the March 17th primary, how there was a lack of sanitation, how the polling stations were unsanitary, how the workers were ill-prepared. A Chicago election worker who staffed the March 17th primary dies after contracting COVID-19. So as a result, I think from what we can tell about the virus, it has a 2-week incubation period. Some people it's longer. But as a result of this, the consequence and repercussion is now that Illinois primary voters are now starting to be notified of possible coronavirus exposure. So nonetheless, I mean, how this virus works is that it can survive on any type of material for, depending on what type of material it is, for 3 or 5 days or even longer, and then there's the incubation period. So now, myself, I voted, my colleagues at Hardlens Media, we voted on March 17th, and I'll get into the reason why we did that. But now all over citizens of Illinois, they're at risk of basically either having it, have been exposed to it, and now probably exposing other people. And with one of the polling workers right now passing away from this just happened yesterday, I really doubt the notion or the idea that we're lowering the curve, like we're starting to flatten the curve, everything's starting to plateau out. I mean, McCormick Place right now is still going to be used potentially as an emergency hospital area, and that place is huge. That's where the People's Summit was at not too long ago in 2017. So this is the fallout from this. And J.B. Pritzker did go on the record saying that, the governor doesn't have the position or the power to shut down a primary. Well, tell that to the governor of Ohio or the governor of Wisconsin, who failed, mind you. The governor of Wisconsin,
right?
He was very adamant about doing that, but he was superseded. Other people went past him. A governor does have power in the state of Illinois, where it's a solid Democratic state in the House and Senate. J.B. Pritzker, at least from my point of view, he did have all the power and authority within him to actually postpone this primary. But because of the Illinois Democratic machine, Cook County Democratic machine, Chicago Democratic machine, the three-headed dragon, this primary was going to happen nonetheless. And now the reason why at least some people turned out to vote for, at least myself included, why I voted on March 17th is because I needed to have a paper ballot. Before this primary, we interviewed a good friend of the show, Dr. Laura Chamberlain. She's been on our show in the early days when we were on the radio. about how there's a lack of election integrity in our state. And because of this primary specifically, early voters could only vote on the machines, but these were brand new machines that were purchased. And unfortunately, there was no way to really tell whether or not your vote actually went to Bernie Sanders or anyone else that you voted for because of I believe, a QBR code that was on there, and that code can be signed to go to any person in particular. So March 17th was the official day to have a paper ballot, so that's when we could have them. Now, the sad consequence of that is because of COVID-19 too, we may never really know the true count and how many votes actually went to Bernie Sanders or not, because our good friend Dr. Laura Chamberlain talked about, and we actually did a follow-up interview with her about how many of the polling stations were not really tallying up the votes properly, and at least in one area, this was before social distancing really came into everyone's lexicon. She mentioned how basically a lot of the votes that were being tallied up were starting to be like passed away and being handed to Cook County, and we'll never know whether or not those votes all went to Bernie Sanders or not, because it's now a big unknown, a big question mark.
So, well, what's even a bigger question mark is why Bernie Sanders never mentions stuff like this. There is no integrity in our vote in America. We need to have a paper trail. Somehow they figure it out in all the rest of the world, but we just can't figure it out in the United States. And our exit polls never match in the United States. They're way off than other countries. Somehow they can do exit polling and it matches, but we just can't do it in the United States. So, and since no one in a position of power will speak about it, it's left to people like you and left to people like the people at the Convo Couch and Tim Canova. And it's remarkable. It's remarkable. It's just another unbelievable failing that is obvious of the Sanders campaign. So let me just ask you about, is there any political damage to the Governor Pritzker for allowing the vote to go on? I mean, are people upset that people are getting sick now because of it? Are they, just besides this one poll worker, I mean, is there any outrage happening?
Well, okay, when we look at Governor J.B. Pritzker and how he came into power, I mean, that's just, it's everything was kind of laid on a pathway for a Democrat to beat our former governor, Governor Bruce Rauner, who did the state shutdown, where he had basically a political infighting with Michael Madigan, who was the Speaker of the Illinois State House. So when Governor Bruce Rauner was running for re-election, he had to face up against whoever the primary opponent was going to be, and that was Governor J.B. Pritzker. So the people of Illinois changed one billionaire for another. And J.B. Pritzker was running on this whole campaign of he was going to embrace some progressive ideas, and that's a give or take on that one. But he was also running an idea of being the anti-Trump governor, that he was going to stand up against Trump. And because people have Trump derangement syndrome, and how Trump right now, how he's handling this entire crisis, right now, I would say at this point, a lot of people are rallying around J.B. Pritzker. But I think as soon as people start realizing that with this primary happening, and the fact that so many more people will be impacted by it, by COVID-19, I think he will start getting some political backlash. But as at this point, not right now. I mean, right now He is being a governor, and he's actually working alongside other Midwestern governors to basically reopen the states. But I don't even know what that looks like, because this has to do with the fallout with Governor Cuomo talking to some governors on the East Coast, talking about reopening their states so that people can go back to work and that we could return back to normal. But after COVID-19, what does normal look like when there are 16 million people and more that will be on unemployment?
So let's get into some more numbers from Illinois. State officials in Illinois reported 1,222 more cases of the new coronavirus, bringing the number of known cases statewide to 23,247 and the death toll to 868 since the start of the outbreak. Now, the thing that I think we're going to find out afterwards is that the death rate, there are a lot more deaths attributed to coronavirus, because right now people are dying that aren't tested. So they don't it's not put COVID-19 on their death certificate. And because, for instance, in New York, heart attacks are up 400% from this time last year. Now, what part of the coronavirus is that it causes pneumonia, which causes heart attacks. So that those deaths will be attributed to heart attacks. They won't be attributed to coronavirus, right? So when it says 23,247 cases and only 868 deaths, I'm going to challenge that number because I'm gonna say that number, that death rate's going to go up if they ever do it correctly. Which I don't know how they're going to be able to do that, but maybe they will. As of March 22nd, the number of new known cases was doubling every 2 days. As of Sunday, the number of new known cases is doubling every 8 days. So it's the time for it to double is so that's what they're trying to do. That's the flattening of the curve. Likewise, the number of deaths was doubling every 2.5 days at the beginning of April, while it's now taking more than 5 days for the number of fatalities to double. So according to it seems like they're starting to flatten the curve in Illinois. So what do you have to say?
Well, there's a little bit of problem with that because, again, during the primary, there was a lack of social distancing and there was a lack of sanitary ways of making sure the polling stations were safe for the voters. So, again, the very fact that one polling worker died, I mean, this is a cause of alarm because a lot of people voted that day, especially in even the polling stations within downtown Chicago, and people were close to each other. And again, I've heard reports from some of my good friends on the ground where they were saying like people were jam-packed in the same room together. The lines were long. There was not that 6-foot distance that's mandatory now that people are doing where you hear it in grocery stores. People were close. So I could see those numbers rising up. But on top of that, too, we have to remember that Chicago, being a major metropolitan city, is also hyper-segregated, and there's a lot of communities that deal with environmental pollution. Take, for example, what happened just recently near Little Village, where basically the city of Chicago just called for a partial factory demolition that blanketed the nearby homes on Saturday. So this was this weekend. Now, the alderman, you actually gave him a shout-out with the last time you were here in Chicago, Alderman Byron Cincho Lopez, is demanding why the city allowed this demolition to happen in the first place. Now, all that particulate matter is in the air, so add in the midst of a pandemic, but also a factory facility was basically destroyed, and all that material blanketed all those homes. So you can imagine if people have respiratory problems already, add that with COVID-19, it's a serious disaster, just like even in my neighborhood, too, where there's the matte asphalt plant. And there's numerous other industrial facilities on the south side of Chicago. People have been having health problems for a very long time, and the city EPA has never really acted on it or even tried to regulate these major corporations that are polluting communities where you have families that have been living in these communities for generations. It's a serious issue, and I don't see that number falling down. If it does, I'll be surprised. But knowing the fact that there's no cure, no vaccination, no immunity to COVID-19, we're only just getting in the beginnings of this crisis. And then add on the fact, too, that, again, 16 million people in this country right now, and that number's probably going to rise up even further, are unemployed. And because of that, those unemployed people don't have their health insurance anymore.
Right. So Trump has already indicated that if you have coronavirus, that the government will pay for your treatment, and they're going to do that through the system of Medicare. So they're going to disperse the funds through their Medicare system to hospitals who take care of people who have coronavirus. So that's nice to hear. But I think what's going to happen, and we've talked about this, is that people are going to realize the ridiculousness of tying your employment to your health care. So now if you have a catastrophe like this, everyone loses their health care, which is the worst time to lose your health care in the middle of a pandemic. So I think people are starting to realize the ridiculousness of that. Go ahead.
Well, actually, just if you rewind back the clocks even further during the early days of this primary, remember Chicago's good old Mayor Rahm Emanuel, the person that Hillary Clinton said during the 2016 primary is doing a good job. Remember, he once said that no one's running up to him saying that, please, get rid of my health insurance. At this point now, especially Mayor Rahm Emanuel, I think there's a lot of people running up to you, yelling at you about the hypocrisy of this neoliberal system that we have, where basically the health insurance industry has been given a bailout and everyone else is left holding the bag. And within the city of Chicago, again, before this crisis, we would talk about how gentrification is impacting the South and West Side communities. You have people working 2 or 3 jobs just to make ends meet in this city, and it's still not enough. Now, imagine that, too. They lose their health insurance. They lose the chance to get any kind of medical attention or buy any prescription drugs that they need to get. And the problem is you could see we might witness a mass exodus of people leaving the city of Chicago even further. The situation is this: we have a system put in place right now that was never prepared for an environmental crisis or a virus like this at all. And for 40, 50, 60 plus years, corporate media has told us that everything's fine, that the United States is a strong bastion, but this one little virus has cracked the entire machine, and we're all witnessing right now just how unstable it is. There's no social safety net. And in Chicago, we could see a lot of people getting hurt, getting displaced. I bring this up on the show quite a few times where, right now we're not at our studio, we're working home, and I miss going to our studio. But and while it's fun driving to my studio, what I've seen, and it's gotten even worse, is that I'm seeing more tents under the viaducts and under the bridges. I'm seeing more abandoned vacant lots where more tent settlements are at. And these people once owned homes. They once lived in apartment buildings. And it's a problem when you have a city government that's turning a blind eye. Now, are there good people right now in city government trying to do that? Yes. Are there enough of them? Absolutely not. I only can count 6 aldermen that are right now doing their job and trying to bring in change. But the very fact that Ed Burke is still in, and you probably know who Ed Burke is because you lived in Chicago, so the guy's still in power. We have these established people been in power for so long, they don't care, and they never did. And this requires a massive pushback. But with this election and with social distancing, I don't know what a grassroots movement's going to look like unless people start waking up to the fact that, yes, everyone's at risk, and while you might be safe for the time being, it'll get to you soon enough.
Hey, how's that new mayor doing? Don't you have a progressive mayor? What's her name? Lori Lightfoot, right? Isn't she? She's
Mayor Lori Lightfoot. I would say initially when she first got elected into office, I did have some high hopes for her. Of course, trying to fix the Democratic machine in just one term is truly an impossible task. But obviously, again, with Bernie Sanders and everything else, everyone's got to take off the rose-colored glasses and look at these politicians as people. No one is perfect, and Lightfoot has messed up on a few key issues, most notably with the Chicago Teachers Union, where the teachers were on strike. And thankfully, they got their rights, they got their benefits. But again, is it still enough? Lightfoot ran on a campaign to really help out the Chicago Teachers Union, and she fell through with that plan. She didn't follow up.
Wow.
That's what led to that strike in the first place. But then again, too, when we're dealing with police corruption, too, she could be more aggressive about dealing with police corruption, police brutality. In the early days of Hardlands Media, we actually did a short report about how 16 men were exonerated for crimes they didn't commit due to the fact that there were 4 police officers that were basically putting false charges and false evidence on them. All the while, these 16 men were accused of crimes that they didn't commit, and that's the situation in Chicago. So I don't know really what the future is for Lightfoot's political career. I'm 50-50 on whether or not she would be reelected or not, depending on how everyone walks out of this COVID-19 crisis. It has yet to be seen, but I think right now with Trump and how he's handling the situation, because of how childish he can be, how buffoonish he can be. A lot of people are looking at our establishment politicians with like, oh yeah, they're pretty good people. But at the end of the day, there's a reason why we got Trump. Trump is a reaction to what's wrong with the body politics in America. He is the rash. He is not the cause of this neoliberal system. He is, I would describe him as a parasite. He just took advantage of a sick body, and that's it. And that's why we have him as president.
Like a virus.
So when you have these corporate when you have these corporate sellout Democrats that are in power, remember, they're the ones that passed NAFTA. They're the ones that were trying to fight for TPP.
That's right.
TPP. They were the ones that were for basically bailing out the banks and major corporations.
Hey, this is the part where I tell you where our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then I would tell you to go join our premium, but nobody has a fucking job. So why don't you just enjoy the video?